Brian Deinhardt. I'm an attorney in the counsel's office at Saney's. And as Karen mentioned, some of the members, many of you included, I'm sure, have reached out to us recently inquiring about civil service fundamentals. They have, questions on various topics. And so we tried to prepare this informational session around some of those questions. But that said, obviously there's many of you here that haven't, specifically asked questions to us. And so what I'd like to do is, to the extent that you have questions, whether you already have questions or, you've come to us with questions or you come up with a question while we're going through this, please put them in the comments section and I will try to stop as frequently as possible to engage in that discussion and see if we can let either we'll try to solve the problem today that you have, or we'll get back to you and, give you an answer. So with that said, feel free if you can either put the questions in the comment section, or if you want to unmute and feel free to interrupt, I guess is what I'm saying. But putting that aside, I guess we'll jump into it and see where we get going with this informational session and hopefully a conversation with you all. So the first item that seems to, if not be confusing, people had some questions about is the concept of provisional, probationary, and permanent appointments to civil service positions in the competitive class. So there's many different designation or what they call jurisdictional classifications of civil service members. Probably the one that's most relevant to many of you is the competitive class, the civil service, which is positions that require an examination or some other competitive evaluation process for selection to those positions. The traditional trajectory of an appointment to a competitive civil service position is the probationary appointment, which is achieved after taking an examination, and an eligibility list is assembled from exam takers. And we'll go over this later. There's something called the rule of threes, which I'm sure many of you have at least heard of. But from those top three candidates, a probationary appointment will be made. You serve your probationary period, and upon the expiration of that probationary period, whether you are informed of it or not, although you should be, the day you work after that probationary appointment expires, you become permanent. And like I said, that's the traditional way that this happens. However, there are many positions that do not have an exam created for the appointment process. When there's no exam created for the appointment process, the appointing officer is allowed to create a provisional appointment. And when a provisional appointment is just, in some sense, a filler until the exam is created, and then the probationary exam taking process has to take place. And as soon as the exam is created and the eligibility list is made up for the appointing authority, at that point, anybody that's in a provisional appointment in that position has to be terminated unless they successfully take the exam and satisfy the rule of threes and is what's known as become reachable for that title and achieve a probationary appointment. So to achieve permanent status, it's critical that you first be appointed as a probationary title holder. If you're a provisional title holder, you do not get any of you won't become permanent unless you go through the exam process and are appointed to a probationary term. The one exception to that is recently there was a law passed that amended the civil service law so that provisional appointees who successfully take the exam are one of in the top three of the exam takers and are selected the probationary appointment. The provisional time, the time that they were in that title as a provisional appointee, counts towards the probationary period. So if you, let's say there's a 26-week probationary period for the specific title, and you've been in that title for a year as a provisional appointee, you take the exam, you're in one of the top 3 scores, and you're appointed to the probationary position, you've already completed all that time and you're automatically permanent at that point. That law was passed, I believe, in September of 2023. I think it's, if I'm remembering correctly, it was September of 2023. You have the appointment to the title following the exam had to have followed that enactment date. And I can get you the exact date. I'm just blanking on it. But if you were appointed to a probationary term prior to the effective date of that statute, that this does not affect you. It only affects you if you've been appointed to a probationary term since that. So any recent probationary appointments, when you had previously served as a provisional appointee, the provisional time would count towards the probationary period, and you could become permanent based on that service. So I know a lot of people had questions about that. So this is probably the first point at which I would stop and see if anybody has questions. So if anybody wants to unmute and ask out loud or type it in the group chat, I can give you a moment to do that, and we can discuss those 3 designations a little bit further.
Ryan, can you just sum up those 3 designations again?
Sure. So a permanent status is equivalent to like a tenure. Once you achieve permanency, you have seniority rights. You have the right to due process before being terminated. So that's what you want to achieve in your position. You want to become a permanent appointee if possible. The probationary appointment is the path to do so. You serve your probationary time, you become permanent. The provisional appointees do not become permanent appointees unless they satisfy the open competitive process, just like anybody else. So if you're provisional, you have no special rights other than you're an employee for that period of time that you're able to maintain the provisional status. So if you're provisional, basically you're just the same as anybody else applying for the position from the outside. So those are the 3 basic concepts. If nobody has any questions, we can proceed on from there. Oh, and Jen Carlson, our Saini's one of our directors, she just pointed out that September 7th, 2023 was the effective date of the statute. So if you were appointed to a probationary permanent track appointment on September 7th, 2023 or later, that would be the date at which your provisional time would count. So let's see, I've got a few questions coming in here. Andy Scott has got a question. Andy, do you want to ask the question out loud, and then so everybody can hear it, and then we can talk it through? Andy? And if not, I can read it through too.
Okay.
So Andy asks, if the exam becomes available while you're in your provisional title, are you required to take the exam? You're not required to take the exam, but that would be with the understanding that if you don't take the exam, you will be terminated, and you won't have the ability to compete for that position. So if you're a provisional, you want to keep an eye out for that exam, and you'd have to take it in order to eventually become a permanent appointee. Let's see. We've Jennifer, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Parzik, asks, if someone moves up from another title, do they still serve probation in the new title? Is that shortened if they reach permanent status in their last title? So I'm assuming you mean there. So Jennifer, actually, if you're around and can could unmute yourself, we could talk through this. Are you talking about basically just a promotion?
Yeah, so maybe they went from like store clerk to senior store clerk. They
Okay.
held the store clerk position for like, I don't know, let's say like 2 years or so. Are they still probationary in the senior store clerk, even though they were granted permanency in the last title?
Generally, yes. There are always exceptions to that. The appointing officer can waive the probationary period in certain circumstances, but generally, yes. In a promotion, you go from the permanent position to a probationary position. However, you can apply to retain your permanent rights to the prior permanent position. So if you aren't satisfactory during your probationary period during the promotion, you can request to be transferred back to the permanent position that you obtained. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. Thank you.
Okay, great. Nicholas DiMartino asks, they are provisional and go out on disability. Then does this time count? Is it time in the position or a date? So if they're provisional and they go out on disability, this is not something that I know for certain, but I believe that the time would not count because you have to be in the provisional position. You have to go from that provisional position appointment in a title to the same exact title with no breaks. I don't. So the second part of your question, Nicholas, if you could you just clarify what you mean by that? Is it time in the position or a date?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know if it was time in the position that would count towards that permanent appointment, or if it's just a date that, as an example, is that 26 weeks from the provisional appointment to where they would be permanent.
So it's time in the provisional appointment applies to whatever probationary period you would have to satisfy if you were selected to that position, right? You cannot achieve permanency by serving long enough in a provisional position. If you serve at that position for years, it still doesn't get you to permanency. But you can take the time from your provisional appointment and apply it once you become appointed as probationary to satisfy the probationary period. Does that make sense?
That's helpful. Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Sure.
If they're provisional and then on disability and the test to become qualified to be permanent in the position, if they don't take that civil service test while it's offered, even though they're out on disability, then is that something you would be able to move on for termination?
So let me get back to you on that one. I know there are certain instances in which unavailability for a test can put you on hold basically, but I don't know how disability plays into that. So we can take a look at that and get back to you on that. All right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Brian?
Sure.
So going back to that question too, around provisional, being provisional in the title, and then the exam becomes available, can the employer from that list generated from that exam hire someone to your title while you're provisional and place them and displace you?
So just so I'm understanding it, you're saying if you're provisional and you are one of the three highest scorers.
Well, no,
So
you haven't even taken the exam, not that it's become
okay.
available. But from those who have taken the exam, they are ranked in order one through three. Can the district or the employer from that list hire one of them and basically lay you off?
Yes, and in fact, they're required to. So if you're provisional and you don't take the exam, well, if you're provisional or not, or you take the exam or not, doesn't matter. The provisional employee has to be terminated unless they become the probationary employee. that's selected. Okay.
Can I
All
ask a
right, so-
follow-up to that as well, which is very similar? If you have a provisional employee waiting to take the test comes out, there's 3 other candidates that are the higher, but that provisional employee took the test, scored, say, in the top 10, but they're not in the top 3 and are doing a good job, they would still need to lose their position because they were not in the top 3.
That's correct. The provisional appointment does not get you any special right to the position. You are just a member of the competitive exam taker. You know, you're just like any other competitive exam taker. So it's, you know, there's nothing really, there's no rights you get by becoming a provisional employee in that sense. You don't have any, you know, expectancy in getting the position. No special rules for the provisional that makes them more competitive than anybody else.
I have one more follow-up. When we're talking about the 3s, if you bring 3 candidates in and none of those 3 candidates are strong or fit the bill, can you then bring in another 3, or do you have to take the top 3?
You have to pick one of the top 3. And we'll get into this in a little bit because I'm going to talk about the rule of 3s. So that's another big topic. But you have to pick one of the top 3 as long as they're willing to accept the position. All right, so there's a few more questions here. Let's see. Mark S. asks, if another position in the same title opens up within a county or same civil service jurisdiction and you are permanent at one employer, can you apply and be hired as permanent with the other? Again, this would be, so it's this, Mark, so you're saying, so basically I think what you might be referring to is a transfer, and there's special rules surrounding transfers. You don't necessarily need to apply and take the test if there's an open position. There's special ways that you can apply for a transfer. I think you have to request a transfer to the personnel officer in your civil service jurisdiction. And then if I'm remembering correctly, you have to support why that you want to be transferred, and then you can basically apply without taking the exam. But you have to demonstrate your fitness for that position to the new civil service jurisdiction. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. It was just if I'm a permanent and they have an open position in another place and they're hiring for provisionals, I would sit there and say, let me go apply at this other place. I'm a permanent. Would I potentially have more rights than a provisional and say, listen, I want to go over here. I'm a permanent within this jurisdiction. I'd like to make a move under that rule. So that's what I'm trying to get at here. You know, what the question is, why would I potentially need or approval if I'm in that title? That's the title you're hiring and I'm already permanent.
So are we talking about the same civil service jurisdiction, or are we talking about a different jurisdiction?
Same jurisdiction,
Okay.
County X, right? So
Okay.
two entities within the same County X, and they posted a position and say, we're hiring this, will be taken from provisional, but you say, hey, wait a second, I'm permanent. I would like to apply for that job. Are there any nuances to that?
Well, so first of all, I'm not sure that situation can occur, because if you're permanent in a title, that would have to mean that there was an exam for that title. And if there's an exam for the title, then they couldn't appoint a provisional appointee. Well, I suppose they could if the exam wasn't being administered and they needed to fill, but I believe that you'd still have to apply for the transfer. I don't think you have any special right to just, you know, insert yourself, say, I want to take that, something along those lines.
Okay.
All right. And was that everything, Mark, that helped you out? Okay, great. Valerie Lloyd asks, if someone is hired provisionally, how long can they remain provisional if the test is not given within 3 months. So I believe the statutory limitation on a provisional appointment is 1 year. In practice, that can easily be extended. It's often ignored. There are plenty of provisional employees that are employed as provisional employees for many years. Valerie, with the second part of your question, if the test is not given within 3 months, so I mean, that's how you would end up remaining a provisional employee, is if the test was not given in any time period, really, right? So if you're provisional, you could be provisional for a year waiting for an exam to be given. Does that make sense? Valerie? All right. Well, Valerie, if you can chime in later, we can talk through that if you'd like.
Brian, a quick question, just to follow
Sure.
up on the comment. Are you saying that the employee has some right that if the test is not administered in a year, that they should be made move on become provisional by statute? Did you imply that?
So are you asking if the employee has a right to become probationary or permanent if they're provisional and the test isn't administered within a year?
Yeah, I was trying to interpret your point about statute, and I didn't know if that was on behalf of the employee or if that was written on behalf, if you will, in the interest of the organization.
Yeah, no, it's not a right of the employee to be promoted out of provisional status just because that time period is expired.
I see. Okay, that answers that. Thank you.
Brian, I have a question, if you don't mind. Sorry.
Sure.
I know that there have been plenty of positions where they've stayed provisional for longer than a year. Is that because there hasn't been a test offered?
Right.
Okay, so that's the only time they stay longer than a year is when there isn't a test that's been offered?
Yes. So typically the purpose of creating the provisional appointment was to allow civil service jurisdictions to hire employees for a position that a test had not been created for. So upon the posting of the provisional employee, they're supposed to be developing the exam. The exams don't necessarily get developed in a timely fashion, and that's what perpetuates the provisional appointment. But if the exam is administered, as soon as it's administered, then the provisional employee, that appointment is over with. Within 2 months of the eligibility list being created, that position has to be terminated, and then a probationary can be appointed. The appointing officer does not actually need to make an appointment, though. They can decide not to, but they can't continue with the provisional appointment. So in that case, the position would become empty.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'll do one more question on this. I know we're getting through our time here, and there's some other stuff I think people might want to hear about. So let's see. So Lexi Mason asks, how does one go about applying to maintain their permanent status in a previous title to move to a new provisional probationary appointment? So I believe you can just request to. So basically, what you want to do is not resign from the previous appointment. So that's the big key. Don't resign from your permanent appointment to take probationary appointment. Presumably is a promotion. Then you can go back and request the right to take the position that you were permanent in. I believe that there's a caveat that that there has to be an open position in that title at the time, and you have to have seniority to be able to revert. All right, so let me just move on real quick I know the rule of threes has already been mentioned, and this is it's something that I think can become confusing for a variety of reasons, and I'm sure many of you have questions about this too. So, you know, what we were talking about when it was mentioned was a situation where someone's in the top 3 scorers on the exam. That's not exactly what the rule of threes is. So when you talk about the rule of threes, it's more appropriate to talk about it as the grouping of individuals who scored equal to or higher than the 3rd highest score on the exam. So let's say somebody scores 95, somebody scores 90, one person each, and then 3 people score 85 on the exam. The 3rd highest score is 85. Everybody equal to or higher than that is reachable. So you've got the person that scored 95, you got the person that scored 90, and you've got the 3 people that scored 85 are all reachable at that point. So it's not just 3 individuals. The appointing officer can choose from any of those 3. That's an important concept. However, if 2 people score, for example, let's say 2 people score 95, one person scores 90, and then a person scores 85. The 90 is the 3rd highest score, and the 2 95s and the 90 are the only ones that are considerable for that position. So in any given situation, you could have only 3 candidates, or you could have, you know, dozens if the 3rd highest score is scored by numerous people. This is complicated also by the fact that I believe a lot of appointments now, a lot of the exam scoring is done what they call band scoring, where you don't actually get the precise score that you scored on the test. You don't get a 97.5. Typically, what will happen is the rules of a particular exam will be specified such that whatever your score is, they round up to the nearest 5 place. So if you get a 96, you get 100. If you get a 92, you get a 95. If you get an 87, you get a 90, something like that. That creates bands where there's sometimes can be a lot of people that get bumped up to that, you know, specific band, and then there can be you know, many applicants that are reachable in that situation for that appointment. And it gives the appointing officer a lot more flexibility as to who they can pick. And so in that case, you know, the 3rd highest band is everybody that's at the 3rd highest band and up is reachable. So, you know, that can be quite a few people, depending on how many people take the test, and what the scores are. So that's, you know, the rule of threes in a nutshell. That's the most important concept, is anybody is reachable that's equal to or higher than the 3rd highest score. And so that can be more than 3 people. I think that's typically confusing. A lot of people think that it's just the top 3 scorers that are reachable. Not always the case. Does anybody have a question about that? All right, so Doug Kennedy asks us, if only 3 people take a test and 1 fails, what happens then with the list? So, so this is important. Obviously, one of the exceptions to the rule of threes is you got to pass the test first, right? I believe the passing score is 70, so you got to score higher than 70 to be in the reachable contingent, even if your failing score is one of the 3 highest. So that's the first thing that's important with Doug's question. What happens to the list? The appointing officer can select from a list of 2 or a list of 1 if those are the only reachable people, just due to the fact that that's the only 1 or 2 people that pass the exam. But I believe in this situation, the appointing officer can also demand that they get 3 reachable applicants. And at that point, they can appoint a provisional person to fill the position until they get to the 3 applicants. So that's one of the exceptions to the rule, that the provisional appointee has to be terminated or there can't be a provisional appointee after an exam is administered. Does that answer your question, Doug?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Okay, and I'm not seeing any more questions on this right now, but if anybody has them, feel free to follow up, either put it in the comments or just, speak up. I know people had questions about study materials. Depending on the test, and who, what jurisdiction is administering it. Typically the civil service department that's administering and appointing the position will have study materials. You look on their website. If you need help finding materials, you can always reach out. I don't know, Karen, if Saini's has study materials for civil service exams, but I do know that for the most part, when an exam is posted, the civil service department posting the exam will have some resources, either specifically that they've developed or that they can point you to. I also know that there's a lot of CSEA materials out there online that are accessible to like CSEA members. But I would check with the civil service department first. Their websites are usually good resources.
Brian, someone had asked too, again, if this will be, we know it's being recorded, but it will be posted on our website. And we can perhaps work with our communications department to make a civil service section on our website, like a pull down menu. And that's something that we'd like to build up more with resources. I think, this is complicated, dense, very particular information. And I think the more resources or guidance documents that we can kind of gather and put up on that section on our website, the better for our members who are civil service employees. So, I would say that we would welcome and we will look for resources to strengthen the information that we have on our website on this topic.
So that sounds great, Karen. All right. So going back to a point that I think I just made about the fact that the appointing officer does not have to select someone from the eligible list for the position. If they decide not to select someone, the position has to remain open. So if they get, their top three candidates or the banded, equal or higher to the third highest score group that's reachable, and they decide not to select anybody, the position has to remain open. You can't have a provisional at that point. And the appointing officer can decide to recanvass at that point, maybe 6 months later, maybe a year later, from the eligibility list to see if anybody's still interested. That's one way that appointing officers can effectively move their way down the list past the top three grouping. Maybe they hope that in 6 months, certain people will have found new jobs and they can, get their way down. And so at that point, they'll recanvass, and then they can try to select from that group again. Once the eligibility list is certified, you remain on that list for a minimum of a year, although it can be extended, I believe, up to about 4 years. So, anytime they recanvass, they still have to go back to those same people. You don't ever lose your spot on the list for declining the position or not achieving the position. So you'll continue to be on that list. So every time they recanvass, if they decide not to hire, they don't like that hiring group, you'll still get the notification. And then at that point, you can say, I want to be considered or not considered. But that is one way that they can get around the rule of threes in that situation, where they decide not to hire someone and then wait till a later date and recanvass for the position. Let's see. So now we've got some questions. Let me see here. So Jennifer Parzik asks, how do you go about contacting civil service if the title description is outdated or the test questions are perhaps outdated to get them to update them? This one, I don't know. I'll have to look into this and get back to you.
So I work in technology. I'm one of the people who we hire a lot of techs, And when you look at a lot of the job descriptions for a lot of the techs, the questions they're being asked, the job descriptions, they're completely outdated and not up to date with the technology of today.
Oh, interesting. I see. Okay. So, when you're talking about the job description, you're talking about the exam announcement itself, or is there a separate job description created by?
When you
the
go to
employer?
when you go to the civil service site and you look up, like, let's say I look up computer specialist training, the
Okay.
civil service will give me that job description and the requirements that are needed to have that position. And when you read through that description and some of the others, it's completely outdated.
Okay. And so the what you're looking to do is to contact the civil service jurisdiction and have them, basically create
Yes.
new requirements for that position. Okay.
Yes.
Let me look into that for you. That's an interesting question that I haven't come across before.
Thanks.
Brian,
And we'll get back
Brian,
to that. Yes.
Brian, it's
Hi,
the
Eric. How you doing?
the county civil service would have to ask the state for a new test or a new job description, okay? The state
Okay.
is the one who issues the test and the job descriptions. So when you have these technology positions that lag behind 10 or 20 years, that has to be applied through the state for a new updated description and or test.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that what you're looking for, Jennifer?
Yes.
All right. All right. So Susan Gray asks us, what if no one is interested when canvassed? So this would be a situation, Susan, where they establish an eligibility list and everybody they reach out to, nobody is interested.
That's correct.
I believe at that point, I don't know the answer to that specifically either. I would assume that they could appoint a provisional appointee at that point, but I will look into that and get back to you on that.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm hoping what we can do is, we will print the chat and, yeah, and Brian and others here in the office can look at the chat questions and identify ones which needed a little bit more research. And, hopefully we can send something back to everyone who registered, including a request for next steps here on our end with resources, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, I think we can probably send this out as like a group email and reply. Chris Fragauda, I hope I'm saying that right. Correct me if I'm not.
No, it's Kristen Wada. It's okay.
Oh, all right. And so your question is, do you remain probationary until you are permanent, even if the company is hiring for the role that you are in? I'm not sure that I understand that question. So you're in your probationary term and there's a similar position posted. Is that what you're asking?
Correct. The role that I'm in right now, there are several others, and they're transitioning from one title to the one that I am in right now. And they have had the title that they're in for quite some time, but however, they have not taken the civil service exam like I have. And so now that I'm probationary, I wanted to know if they do go ahead and take this exam while I'm in my probationary period, if they do score higher than me, do I stay probationary? Do they kick me out, or what does that look like?
Okay, so no, so if you're a probationary appointee, you've already gotten past the appointment phase. So the test results that they get don't affect you. So you stay on your probationary track until you become permanent. And if there's provisional appointees that do better, that scored better than you on the test, that doesn't affect your current probationary appointment.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Let's see. All right.
Brian, you had mentioned something about retaining or staying on the list. So if you were canvassed for a position and you
Yes.
turned down the position
Mhm.
for whatever reason, and you can retain, you can stay on the list.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I may have misspoke there. If they don't hire at that time, so if they recanvass and then don't hire, you stay on the list.
Is there a rule that you can stay on the list if it's for location or salary? Or is it specific to each county?
So you're asking if you stay on the list.
But let's say
based-
your
when-
county is pretty large. And let's
Okay.
say, a position would be 100 miles away. And you decline it
Okay.
because of geographic reasons. Would you still remain on the list then because it's just not feasible to drive that far?
So it's my understanding that you can, for positions that are, location based, that you can indicate to the Civil Service Commission, what locations you're willing to accept jobs for. But my understanding is if you don't do that and then decline the position, then you would come off the list.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay. Let's see. Joseph Owens asked, what are some acceptable reasons to not choose someone reachable for a position or terminating them from a provisional appointment? So, there's not really any. So basically, they don't have to accept somebody, even if they're reachable for the position. They can decide not to hire anybody, or they can decide to choose one of the other qualified reachable applicants. The exception to that would be they can't, the reasons can't be discriminatory or something along those lines. Similar answer to how you can terminate a provisional appointee. Provisional appointees don't have any job protections. They can be terminated at will, again, so long as the termination justification doesn't violate any sort of anti-discrimination or other, unlawful termination statutes. And Kim, I see you're asking again if there's a number to contact the state about outdated job descriptions. We can look into that and maybe help you with that process. That seems.
Brian, I texted you one if you want to put it up on the chat, the contact number for civil service in general. Or we can put it up later.
Yeah. Can you just type it into the chat here?
Yep, I'll get it.
I'm not sure. I'm not seeing the text come in yet. All right. So let's move on to next topic that I've got. This has to do with out of title work, potentially reclassifying your position, and what you do if you end up having more work to do for whatever reason. So the first thing you want to do here is you're going to want to look at your job description that was posted with the exam announcement. That is the controlling document in every case. If your employer has a job description that they publish, that they maintain, that they give to you when you ask for a job description, that does not matter. What matters is the official Civil Service Commission job description that was published with the exam announcement. That's what you're always going to want to refer to. So if you get assigned a new duty, something that you have not been doing before, you're going to want to look at your job, that civil service job description, to make sure that the work is within your title, to make sure you're not doing out of title work. And if it turns out that the work is out of title, there are some, various ways that you can address that. One of the ways that you can address that is by appealing to the Civil Service Commission, and you can obtain a cease and desist order where your employer has to, remove that additional duty. Some unit contracts, I believe, have additional remedies for, further pay for out of title work. Under the Taylor law, which is not, necessarily limited to civil service employees, but additional work can also implicate what's known as impact bargaining. So if you're given out of title work, your civil service unit can negotiate on your behalf, request additional compensation for you, with the threat that you may seek to have the work removed. So, that can give you some negotiation leverage. There's also the concept of reclassifying your position when the additional duties or qualifications that you are required to have for your position are so, such a departure from what you're currently already doing. You can apply to the civil service department for reclassification of the position, at which point, you can potentially increase compensation, change the title that you're working at, change the pay grade. Any questions that anybody have on anything about out of title work? Anything like that? I'm seeing
Yes.
Jennifer. Okay. Oh, hi, Lori.
Brian, I have a question. I was just typing it in. As the world of work evolves, the tasks that someone might need to do change. So as an employer, should I be creating a new job duty statement and submitting it to civil service? Because my concern is that employee might then lose their job if the job gets reclassified.
If the job gets reclassified, and so basically they would have to. So I guess the question is, can that employee remain in the title if that title gets reclassified?
Right, because what my support person does today is different than what my support person did 20 years ago. We don't use typewriters anymore. We use technology. So when you're talking about things changing, do we need to create new duty statements?
So I guess the question would be what the classification of the position, if what they're doing now is consistent with that. So if they're doing different tasks, but those tasks are still within the official description, I don't think that you would need to get that reclassified. But is there like additional education or something?
No.
Additional training?
No, but for example, how we do attendance, how we track data. We track data now much more than we did 20 years ago. So those things have evolved in my clerical support roles.
So could you give me just a concrete example that is something that might conflict with the official description?
So someone in a clerical support role for me now would need to apply the rules of federal regulations when they are entering data into a database that we are required to use by the state.
Okay.
And that wasn't done when that person was hired.
Right. Okay. So I guess what I would say is the first thing you'd want to do is get a hold of that description and make sure that that's actually something that conflicts with it. Because as long as that, tasks change, but if the description that's the official description says something along the lines of that you need to enter data in this database, but it doesn't say what how you have to do it or what regulations or whatnot you need to follow, then I don't think that that's really a situation where it's necessary to change the description.
Okay,
It's really you
Thanks.
gotta look at that to see if there's a conflict.
okay, thank you.
Okay.
We have time for maybe one or two more questions, or
Okay.
Brian, if you want to spend a little bit of time on the next information piece that you were going to share.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, why don't I get into that? And if people have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to the St. E's legal office. Is my email available? I can put it in the chat too. If it's not, I believe it was with the announcement though for this webinar. So next thing I wanted to talk about was seniority, dealing with layoffs, and bumping rights when you may potentially face a layoff. So in any situation where your employer decides for whatever reason, budgetary, that they need to do layoffs, the first people to go will always be the provisional appointees in that title that they decide needs to be reduced. Provisional and potentially temporary appointees, but I don't know that that's a very common situation. So provisional appointees will be the first ones that are laid off in that situation. Next will be the probationary appointees. And then the question is, how do you establish seniority in a title among the permanent appointees? So the seniority commences in that title from the first date of permanent appointment. So whenever you get your permanency date, whether it's they grant it after a certain minimum period of probation or your maximum period of probation runs out, that's the date from which your seniority runs. Even if, for example, you take a permanent, or if you take a probationary appointment as a as part of a promotion, you move up, or you take a provisional promotion and then you move back, your permanency, the seniority in your permanent appointment runs from the date that you were first appointed to that permanent position. So if you move back to that position, you don't lose your seniority. The employer will then create a seniority chart, and the least senior individual will be the next person that's laid off. Then comes into play what's known as bumping. And bumping allows a person in a title series to take the position of a person in a lower step in that title series, so long as the person at the higher step that's being laid off has more seniority as the lower person. At that point, they can elect to bump the person at the lower title series and take that position instead of being laid off. Does anybody have any questions about that at all?
What if they don't have the minimum requirements as defined by civil service?
I'm sorry, what was that? You don't have the...
Like what if, to take for instance, to sit for an exam, there are certain levels of experience and requirements. Is that a given that in order to do a bumping, there needs to be some level of competency in that role for the person to move into it?
So if you're at a higher, I guess I would have to see the specific instance, but my understanding would be that if you were at a higher position in the title series, you would typically have to have the requisite skills in the lower position. I don't think that there would be any additional, fitness for that position that would necessarily be required.
Okay, I think perhaps I need to better understand the title series.
Yeah, so the title series is going to be set forth usually in the exam announcement, in the job descriptions there. They'll usually lay out the classification of each series in the title. And so that's, it's important probably for everybody who's got a position that's probationary to permanent, posted for an exam, that you take a look at that, because there's a lot of important things going on in that document. In particular, you'll see what work is in or out of your title. You'll see what you need to do to advance, what the next position is above you in the title series, and in the situation where bumping comes into play, you'll see what the position is below you. And it's just good generally to know what you're supposed to be doing, what you're supposed to be proficient in, and that can go a long way in you protecting your rights, especially once you achieve permanent status. You've got seniority issues. You've got, assignment of additional duty issues, that sort of thing. So that's, probably something that I'd recommend for all you to take a look at.
Brian, maybe you can take one more question. TC
Sure.
in the chat says, our district says bumping is not allowed, but it clearly is by law. What do we do? It's a good one.
I guess I'd want to know what their justification is for saying that bumping is not allowed. Civil service law is very complicated. There may be some justification that I'm not aware of, but TC, we can talk to after this, and try to drill down on why they're saying that. But generally, that is the practice. Higher title series appointees can bump lower title series employees as long as they have more seniority. But maybe we can talk about why they're saying that at a later date. I can get in touch with you about that.
Okay. We're at the hour. I want to just thank you, Brian, for doing a great job, particularly responding to questions for information that's kind of like the tax code. I think this was so much fun. I think we're going to have Brian back to explain how the DMV works in a couple of weeks, because we have a much better understanding now. So we will continue this conversation. I think it's clear that there's a lot to learn here. And I know that here on our end at Saini's, we can do more to, strengthen resources for learning, et cetera. So we'll focus on that too. So once again, and yep, just as Mark said over there, thank you so much to cover. Well, we scratched the surface and we will keep at it. I want to say that we are going to have a great conference in Lake Placid, October 27th and 28th. And you can be sure that we are going to feature a session on just this, on civil service fundamentals, questions and answers. It might be a tabletop, it might be a spotlight, but we will feature a session. And I bet you'll have a great time being there and learning all this fun stuff. So thank you again, everyone. And thank you, Brian. And everyone have a great evening. And we will be back in touch with all of you. So thanks you.
Karen. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good night.